The sound of the horn which announced the arrival of the horse-drawn Bianconi coaches in towns up and down the country in the 1800s. The sound of a daring business idea which was to bring the excitement and discovery of travel to the mass of the people for the first time. As Carlo Bianconi's network of passenger long cars spread through the countryside, people who rarely before had bothered to leave their parishes could now travel where they pleased at a penny farthing a mile. It was revolutionary. It was the beginning of our present public transport system, and it made a fortune for its founder. And it was here at Hearn's Hotel in Clonmel that extraordinary transport business story began. Bianconi had come to this country from his native Italy as a penniless apprentice. He tramped the roads of the countryside selling religious pictures, and he had only 2 words of English. He'd shout, "Buy, buy," as he peddled his wares. And to show his customers the price in pennies, he'd hold up the right number of fingers. But he was to establish a business empire which straddled the country and which brought him wealth and position. And in Dick Whittington style, he was to become a millionaire and the mayor of his adopted town, Clonmel. Brought here as an apprentice to a travelling Italian picture frame maker, he stayed and set up business in selling frames himself in Gladstone Street, Clonmel, after unsuccessful attempts elsewhere. Here he did well, and he decided to risk investing in his real brainwave, travel. Here at Hearn's Hotel he set up headquarters, first giving a service to Care and back, a round trip of 22 miles. It was called Hearn's then as now because Bianconi concentrated on his own travel business, and he let out the inn or hotel to be run by his agent. We'd call it franchising today. The agent in Clonmel was Dan Hearn, hence Hearn's Hotel, and so it was with other agents throughout the country. Bianconi was seen as a fair but firm employer. He paid well by the standards of the time, but you couldn't keep hens in case they might eat some of your master's horse's oats. Colonel Sidney J Watson is co-author of A Life of Bianconi.
Always at the back of his mind was the thought that his girlfriend might not marry the person to whom she was betrothed, either because he died of his wounds which he'd received in action, or that if they were married, the marriage wouldn't last very long because of his state of health. And that was his spur and ambition, to become a big man, so that if his girlfriend was still unmarried, he'd be of sufficient status to be able to claim her hand. And that went on for something like 25 years, although they never communicated. And having told himself this scenario, he began to believe that it was true. It became completely part of himself. And when in 1826 the news came to him that she was married, her husband was still alive, it was a very great shock to him. And it's interesting that at that time you suddenly find great blanks in his diary. And in the Waterford election of 1826, when he had committed his transport to transport the supporters of one side, he suddenly changed sides in the middle and got paid £1,000 for doing it. And that was very uncharacteristic, because I know in politics perhaps to change sides may be occasionally politically unavoidable, but to get paid for it, I think, is always ethically unacceptable.
Bianconi prospered and moved his family into the elegant Silver Springs house in the town, having married a Dublin stockbroker's daughter. As a devoted Catholic, he was irked by a clause in the lease which required that Mass could not be said under the house's roof. So he took the roof off and put on a new one, and Mass was said. And as he rose in the world, it wasn't the excitement of business or the love of property alone which drove him on. There was the memory of a loved one who had been denied him. As his business spread through the country, Bianconi was now able to move to Longfield House on its thousands of acres. A house he had first noticed as a peddler boy, and down the steps of which he had been thrown for daring to go to the front door to sell his pictures. But his success was shadowed somewhat when his daughter contracted consumption, and the family moved with her temporarily to the warmth of his homeland, Italy. In soap opera style, he met his lost love, now a duchess. His daughter fell in love with her son, but the parents forbade marriage, perhaps concealing a dark secret.
You know the old advice that one gives one's daughters and granddaughters, and if you can't be good, be careful, and if you can't be careful, remember the date. Well, if we remember the date and go back to 1830, the Duchess's son was born the next year, and therefore it is not improbable that Bianconi was his father.
Double tragedy. Clonmel was to elect him its mayor twice. He was a friend of Daniel O'Connell's, a director of the National Bank, deputy lieutenant of the county, and he'd made $1 million. But what became of it all?
He was not a very successful father, and I think that often happens with famous men. When they ought to be establishing a communicating and close relation with their children, they themselves are on the make and just haven't got the time. And also they are inclined to think that their children will automatically, or should be, carbon copies of themselves. And they are disappointed when they're not. Obviously one wants one's children to do their own thing in their own way. But in Bianconi's case, he never gave any advice to his son about how to use money, how to spend money. He gave him far too much money, and then was very upset when his son, like the prodigal son in the Bible, wasted his substance on riotous living. And that's exactly what his son did, and his son finally died bankrupt in England at a young age. I think he was 26, that was all. And his body had to be brought back to Ireland in a coffin disguised as a grand piano, because in those days, bodies of people in debt could be seized by the authorities and sold for medical practice.
This year, Clonmel celebrates the birth of its remarkable son 200 years ago. There has already been a glittering ball, there is to be a military tattoo, sporting events, a stamp is to be issued, and the town may twin with Bianconi's home area of Como.
But there's no way that Clonmel is going to forget Bianconi, and indeed there's no way Ireland will forget him either, because we feel that the commemoration events of this particular year will really help to put Clonmel on its rightful place on the map.
Charles Bianconi died in September 1875, 2 days before his 90th birthday. And it's said that in the night outside the chapel where he lies to rest near his family home could be heard the sound of the ghostly galloping horses which had drawn his coaches.